File transfer complete.
This is the Arizona Podcast. Stories about the people, places, and events found along the highways and back roads of the Grand Canyon State. For more information on our podcast, visit ArizonaPodcast.com.
And welcome to Arizona Route 66, the podcast. My name is Christopher, and in this edition, we'll talk about the towns that refuse to die. When the interstate came in, it didn't just move the traffic. It made a decision about which towns mattered and which ones didn't. The highway engineers drew their lines on maps in offices far from the Southwest. They measured grades and curves and traffic counts, and they built the fastest path from one point to the other. And when they were done, some towns found themselves on a new road, and some towns found themselves standing alone on a two-lane highway, watching the cars disappear over the horizon. Nobody sat in an office in Washington and said, "Let's kill Seligman." Nobody looked at a map and decided that Hackberry had run its course. The interstate didn't hate those towns. It just didn't need them anymore. And in the desert Southwest, when a road stops needing you, the silence comes fast and it comes hard. Most of the towns didn't make it. The diners closed. The motor courts went dark. The gas stations locked their pumps and the owners packed what they had and what they could carry, and, well, they followed the traffic to wherever it was going. The buildings went quiet, and eventually the desert started taking them over one wall at a time. That's what the desert does. It's patient and it's thorough, and it doesn't care about your history. But not all of them went quietly. Today I want to talk about 4 towns that by every reasonable measure should have folded when the interstate came. Seligman, Hackberry, Amboy, Two Guns. Each one took a different kind of hit. Each one had a different reason to give up. And what happened to them and what didn't happen to them says something worth paying attention to about the people who decided, well, the place still mattered when the rest of the world had already moved on. This is the story of the towns that refused to die, and one that did but refuses to be forgotten. The first one we point out is Seligman. If you want to understand what happened to Route 66 when the interstate came, Seligman is where you start. Not because it's the biggest town on the Arizona stretch, not because it had the most famous landmark or the most dramatic history, but because of what one man decided to do when everything went quiet. Angel Delgadillo has told the story so many times it's actually worn grooves in the air around the barbershop on Route 66. And every time he tells it, the numbers are the same. 9,000 cars a day come through this town. Businesses that depend on those cars, diners and gas stations and motor courts and barbershops itself. A community built around that simple fact that people needed a place to stop, and Route 66 was the road they were stopping on. Then, on September 22, 1978, Interstate 40 opened between Kingman and Ash Fork, and the traffic was gone. Not gradually, not slowly, gone. By 2:30 in the afternoon on that very first day, the street through Seligman was quiet in a way it had never been quiet before. Not peaceful quiet, the other kind, the kind that settles into a place when something has ended and everyone knows it, but nobody wants to say it out loud. Seligman didn't collapse overnight. Towns rarely do. There's always a period where people hold on, where the regulars keep coming and the loyal customers make the drive out of habit or loyalty or even stubbornness. But the bleeding started that day and it didn't stop. Businesses that had served Route 66 travelers for decades watched their customer base disappear mile by mile as the interstate pulled everyone who used to stop on that road didn't get through to Seligman anymore. Some businesses held on for a while, some didn't. The town that had been a reliable and a busy stop on the Mother Road was now a town on a road that, most people didn't even know existed anymore. The signs that used to point people towards Seligman were gone. The maps that used to show Route 66 as a primary route were being replaced by maps that showed Interstate 40. A whole generation of travelers were growing up not knowing that Seligman was even there. Angel watched it happen from his barber shop. He'd grown up in Seligman. His family was there. His neighbors were there. The people who came into that shop weren't just customers. They were the community he'd known his entire life. And somewhere in that silence, watching his town bleed out one closed business at a time, he made a decision that most people in his position never make. He decided the road still mattered, and that somebody needed to say that out loud before it was too late. He started making phone calls. He talked to business owners up and down the Arizona stretch. He wrote letters to anyone who would listen. He reached out to the tourism boards and highway associations and anyone else he could think of who might have a reason to care about what was happening to these towns. Most people thought he was tilting at windmills. The interstate was built. The traffic was gone. What exactly did he think was going to bring it back? But Angel wasn't trying to bring the traffic back to the interstate. He was trying to make people remember that the old road was still there, that the towns were still there, that there was something out on that two-lane highway that the interstate was never going to be able to offer no matter how many lanes it had. On February 18, 1987, he formed the historic Route 66 Association of Arizona. It wasn't a big organization. It wasn't even well-funded. It was a group of people who believed that what was left on Route 66 in Arizona was worth preserving and worth telling people about. 9 months after the association was formed, Arizona declared the stretch from Seligman to Kingman the first officially designated historic Route 66 in the country. The revival of Route 66 didn't start in Chicago. It didn't start in Los Angeles. It didn't start at a federal agency or tourism board or Hollywood production company. It started in a barber shop in Seligman, Arizona, because one man refused to let a thing die before someone had fought for it. Angel's shop is still there today. The chairs are still there. The photos on the wall are still there, and people drive from Germany and Japan and Australia to sit in that chair and talk to the man who saved the road. That's not nostalgia. That's something deeper than nostalgia. That's what happens when one person decides that a thing still matters and acts like it does before anyone else believes it. Because of what Angel started in Seligman, towns all the way from Illinois to California had a reason to believe their stretch of road was worth fighting for, too. The international Route 66 preservation movement that exists today, the travel clubs in Europe, the guidebooks in Japan, the travelers flying across the world to drive a two-lane highway in the American Southwest, all of it traces back to some meaningful way to a barber in Seligman who made some phone calls in 1987 because he didn't want his town to die quietly. Let's take a look at Hackberry, the town that found a second life. It's 30 miles east of Kingman on the original Route 66 alignment. It's Hackberry, and Hackberry's story is different from Seligman in almost every way except the ending. Hackberry was never a big town. Even in its peak as a Route 66 stop, it's a small community built around a gas station, a general store, and the steady stream of travelers passing through it on the Mother Road. It didn't have Angel. It didn't have a famous landmark or a preservation association or a barber with a phone and a cause. When the interstate took the traffic away, Hackberry just went quiet the way small towns do when the road that gave them their reason to exist stops bringing the people through. For years, the old general store sat there in a way, most abandoned buildings do on the Arizona Desert Road. The paint faded, the pumps rusted, the signs that used to catch travelers' eyes on the way through were, pretty much bleached out by the sun until you could barely read them. The kind of place you drive past on a back road and wonder what it used to be and who used to stop there and whether anyone remembers. Then something unexpected happened. An artist found it. Bob Waldmeyer was not a businessman or a preservationist or even a tourist developer. He was a wanderer, an artist who lived on Route 66 the way other people live in houses. He traveled it constantly, drawing incredibly detailed illustrated maps and the artwork that captured the road in a way that, well, photographs never quite could. His work became some of the most recognized and beloved artwork ever associated with Route 66. And if you've seen the Pixar film Cars, you've seen a version of Bob. The character Fillmar, the old VW bus with the peace sign and the organic fuel, was inspired in part by him. He started using the old Hackberry store as a base. He brought attention to it simply by being there and by being who he was. People who followed his work found their way to Hackberry. Travelers who might have driven past without slowing down pulled in because they had heard about the artist who was living and working out in the general store on Route 66. He eventually moved on the way wanderers do, but the attention he brought to the Hackberry store didn't leave with him. The property changed hands, and, well, the new owners looked what was still there and made a decision. They didn't tear it down and start over. They didn't try to modernize it or turn it into something it wasn't. They just leaned into what it was. They kept the old gas pumps out front. They covered the walls inside with Route 66 memorabilia and vintage signs collected from up and down the highway. They parked a 1957 Corvette out front where you can't miss it when you pull off the road. They stocked the shelves with cold drinks and Route 66 souvenirs and the kind of things that travelers on a two-lane highway actually want to find when they pull off looking for something real. And they slowed everything down. Nobody rushes you at the Hackberry General Store. There's no timer on how long you can look around. There's no pressure to buy something and move on. The whole point of the place is that you stop and you look and you feel like you found something that the interstate was never going to give you, no matter how many rest stops it built. Today, Hackberry General Store is one of the most photographed stops on the entire Arizona stretch of Route 66. Travelers who've driven past 100 times on Interstate 40 without knowing it existed pull off the two lanes and spend an hour there without even planning to. It shows up in Route 66 guidebooks from Europe. It gets tags in social media posts from travelers who found it by accident and couldn't believe that they had stumbled onto it. Hackberry didn't survive because it had a plan. It didn't survive because a government agency stepped in or because a corporation saw an opportunity. It survived because someone looked at a forgotten building on a forgotten stretch of road and saw that it was still there instead of, well, what was missing. And then they did the work of making it worth stopping for. Sometimes that's all it takes. One person who looks at a place the rest of the world has written off and decides it's worth something. The road has always rewarded that kind of stubbornness. So now let's talk about Amboy, the ghost town that ain't dead yet. Amboy, California sits across the Arizona border in the Mojave Desert, and it has absolutely no business still existing. The official population is 0, though on any given day you'll find a handful of people there keeping the place alive. The surrounding desert is one of the most inhospitable stretches of land along the entire Mother Road. Summer temperatures regularly hit 120 degrees. There's nothing for miles in any direction except for the creosote bushes, the volcanic rock, and, well, the silence of the two-lane road running straight through the middle of it like somebody drew a line with a ruler and dared the desert to argue with it. And yet, Roy's Motel and Cafe has been there since 1938. The neon sign has been glowing for the better part of a century. That sign, the red Roy's against the flat Mojave sky, is one of the most photographed images on the entire Mother Road. Travelers who've never been to California know that sign. It shows up in Route 66 books and documentaries and travel articles from countries that are, well, they're just a lot farther from the Mojave Desert than Arizona is. Roy still sells gas, still sells cold water, which in the middle of the Mojave in July is not a small thing. Still sells postcards and souvenirs to everyone who pulls in off the road. And people do pull in every single day from everywhere. Amboy's official motto is one of the best lines on the entire Route 66 corridor: "The ghost town that ain't dead yet." That's not marketing copy. That's a statement of fact delivered with exactly the right amount of desert attitude. You could spend a week trying to write a better description of what Amboy is, and you wouldn't get there. The ghost town that ain't dead yet says everything. Amboy's modern story took a significant turn in 2005 when a man named Albert Acura decided that a piece of American history was worth saving on his own dime. Acura was the founder of Juan Polo restaurant chain in Southern California, and he purchased the entire town of Amboy at an auction for $425,000. Not a building, not a lot, the entire town. The post office, the church, the school, the airstrip, Roy's Motel and Cafe, all of it. One check, one man, and one decision that kept Amboy on the map when every logical and financial reason said to let it go. Albert Acura passed away, and his son Kyle has since taken over the restoration and the management of the property. The vision Albert started is still moving forward under Kyle's watch. The lights are still on at Roy's. The sign is still glowing every night against the Mojave sky. And Amboy is still there, still open, still selling cold water to grateful travelers, when every reasonable calculation said it should have been reclaimed by the desert decades ago. There's something about Amboy that gets people in a way that, well, it's hard to explain if you haven't been there. Maybe it's the isolation. Maybe it's the way the sign looks at dusk when the light goes orange and the neon comes up against it. Maybe it's the sheer stubborn fact that it exists at all. You drive through miles of nothing, genuinely nothing, and then Royce appears and it feels like a miracle. Not a comfortable miracle, a stubborn, sun-baked, slightly defiant miracle. Amboy didn't survive because anyone had a brilliant strategy. It survived because of Albert Acura. He believed it was worth saving, and it's still surviving because Kyle Acura believes his father was right. That's a good reason as any to keep the lights on. The ghost town ain't dead yet, not by a long shot. And our final look is at Two Guns, the town that didn't survive but just won't go away. I want to be honest with you about something before we get into Two Guns. Two Guns didn't make it. The buildings are gone. The people are long gone. What's left is a collection of crumbling ruins sitting in the Arizona desert between Winslow and Flagstaff that, well, most drivers on Interstate 40 pass at 70 miles an hour without ever knowing it's there. There's no restoration project. There's no enthusiastic new owner who saw the potential. There's no gift shop or vintage Corvette out front or even cold water for sale. That's it. There's just the ruins and the wind in the desert and one of the strangest and darkest stories of the entire Route 66 corridor. I'm including Two Guns in this conversation anyway, not because it survived, because it refuses to be forgotten, and because the story of what it is says something important about what Route 66 actually carried, which wasn't always pretty and wasn't always simple and wasn't always the stuff of postcards and travel guides. Two Guns in the 1920s was a roadside attraction built around something genuinely dark. A canyon nearby contained a cave where a massacre had taken place. The details of exactly what happened there are still disputed by historians and by the Navajo Nation, and I'm not going to pretend to have the definitive account. What I can tell you is that a man named Harry Miller, who called himself Two Gun Miller, built a tourist operation around the site. He charged admission. He kept mountain lions in cages so travelers could see them up close. He called it the Death Cave, and he marketed aggressively to Route 66 travelers who were driving through the Arizona desert looking for something to break up the long empty miles. It does get darker from there. Miller eventually shot and killed his business partner in a violent dispute over the ownership of the land. The legal battles and the notoriety that followed essentially ended any chance Two Guns had of becoming a real functioning town. By the time Route 66 was officially bypassed decades later, there wasn't much left to bypass. The place had been falling apart for years before the interstate made it irrelevant. What remained after that, well, that's what the desert always does to abandoned places. Slow, patient reclamation. The zoo cages rusted through. The walls of the buildings cracked and fell. The road stopped bringing people through, and the silence moved in and made itself at home in a way that silence does when nothing is pushing it anymore. But here's the thing about Two Guns that I keep coming back to. People still go there. They pull off the highway onto the old alignment, and they walk through what's left of the ruins. They take photographs. They try to piece together what happened here and what the place actually was. The story is too strange and too dark, too deeply human to leave alone. There's no amenity waiting for you when you get there. There's no coffee, no shade worth mentioning, no explanation posted on a sign telling you what you're looking at. Just the ruins and the story, and the desert wind moving through what's left of the walls of a place that, never quite figured out what it wanted to be. Two Guns didn't refuse to die. It died. But it left behind a story powerful enough that people are still making the drive to stand in its ruins 50 years after the last person called it home. And in a strange way, that might be the most Route 66 outcome of all. The road has always carried the whole story, not just the triumphant parts, not just the neon in the motor courts and the diners with the good pie. The hard parts, too, the dark chapters, the places that didn't make it, and the reasons they didn't. Two Guns is Route 66 being honest about itself, and honesty has always been worth something on this road. What do these towns tell us? 4 towns, 4 completely different stories, 4 different outcomes, but when you sit with all of them together, something starts to emerge that I think is worth saying out loud. None of these places survived, or in Two Guns' case, left a lasting mark because of some government program or a corporate investment or carefully executed tourism strategy developed by people in an office somewhere. Seligman survived because of Angel Delgadillo picking up a phone. Hackberry survived because someone looked at a forgotten building and saw what was still worth saving. Amboy survived because of Albert Acura. He wrote a check, and his son Kyle kept the lights on after him. Two Guns didn't survive, but it left a story so strange and so human that people are still driving off the highway to stand in its ruins. In every single case, what made the difference was a person, one person, or a small group of people who decided that a place still mattered when the economics said it didn't, and the traffic said it didn't, and the map said it didn't. That's worth thinking about. Because when an interstate bypasses your town, the logic is brutal and it's clear. The customers are gone, and the rational move is to follow them. Most people did. Most towns did. And there's no judgment in that. You go where the opportunity is. That's always been how it works in America. But the towns that didn't go, and the people who stayed, and the ones who showed up to help, they preserved something that, turned out to be irreplaceable. Not just for Route 66 travelers, for the history, for the culture, for the idea that not everything worth having has to be on the fastest road between 2 points. That some things are worth the detour. That some places earn your time in ways that an interstate rest stop never will. In 2026, Route 66 turned 100 years old. The centennial is bringing attention to travelers and energy to the Arizona stretch in ways that would have been almost impossible to imagine in the dark years right after the bypass. The towns that held on are the reason there's something worth celebrating. The people who refuse to walk away are the reason anyone can drive the road today and find something real at the end of the off-ramp. They didn't know that's what they were doing at the time. Angel wasn't about the centennial. He was about the phone calls in 1987. He was thinking about his neighbors. He was thinking about his town. He was just trying to keep something alive that he believed in, and it still mattered, even when most of the evidence was pointing the other direction. It mattered. It still does. And the road is still there to prove it. Thanks for spending some time on the road with me today. If you've got a story from one of these towns or a stretch of the Arizona Route 66 corridor that you think deserves more attention, I want to hear about it. You can reach out to Mary and me at letstalk@arizonapodcast.com. That's letstalk@arizonapodcast.com. You can find us at arizonapodcast.com and on Apple Podcast or wherever you get your podcast. And if this episode meant something to you, please share it with someone who loves this road. The Centennial is here, and the more people who know what's out there on this little 2-lane road, the better. Until next time, travel well, my friends.
Program terminated. Thank you for listening to the Arizona Podcast. For more information on our podcasts, the people, places, events, or the sponsors heard, visit ArizonaPodcast.com. Available for download everywhere.